To the public, Marie Osmond looked like the definition of success. Fame, hit records, television stardom, and one of America's most recognizable entertainment families. But behind the smile was a very different story. One filled with pressure, emotional pain, impossible expectations, and secrets she carried for decades without anyone truly understanding what she was going through. And it raises an uncomfortable question. How many celebrities from Hollywood's so-called golden family era were hiding private struggles while millions of fans believed their lives were perfect? Born Olive Marie Osmond in 1959 in Ogden, Marie grew up as the only daughter among 8 brothers in the famous The Osmonds family. Inside the Osmond household, music wasn't treated like a hobby. It was a way of life. Every child had responsibilities, schedules, rehearsals, and expectations to meet. Success was not optional, it was expected. While most children spent afternoons riding bikes, playing games outside, or simply enjoying a normal childhood, Marie later revealed that her own days were filled with singing lessons, rehearsals, recording sessions, television appearances, and endless travel. There was always another performance waiting. Another camera. Another audience. By the age of 4, she had already appeared on television. Before she was old enough to fully understand fame, she was already living inside it. But what happens to a child when their entire identity becomes tied to performance? From the outside, the Osmonds represented the perfect American family. They were wholesome, disciplined, deeply religious, and admired by millions. Parents trusted them. Television executives loved them. Fans saw them as proof that fame and morality could exist together. But behind closed doors, Marie was quietly carrying trauma that would shape much of her adult life. Years later, she revealed that she had been abused as a child by someone trusted by the family. Not a relative, but someone close enough to leave emotional scars that followed her for decades. At the time, she didn't fully know how to process what had happened. She only knew that fear had entered her life very early. And for years, she said nothing. Like many people from her generation, Marie believed speaking publicly about abuse would only bring shame, embarrassment, and pain to the family she loved. Silence became her survival mechanism. She buried the trauma and tried to keep moving forward as though nothing had happened. But trauma does not disappear simply because someone refuses to speak about it. As Marie entered her teenage years, the emotional damage began affecting nearly every part of her life. She later admitted that the abuse left her fearful of men and struggling with confusion, insecurity, and emotional isolation. While audiences watched a cheerful teenage celebrity smiling under studio lights, privately she was dealing with anxiety and emotional pain that very few people could see. Yet despite everything happening internally, Marie continued performing. In the early 1970s, she made a bold decision that separated her career from the rest of the family. While her brothers focused mainly on pop music, Marie chose country music instead. It was a risky move. Some people doubted whether audiences would accept her outside the Osmond image. But then came Paper Roses. The song exploded in popularity and quickly climbed to #1 on the country charts. Suddenly, Marie was no longer simply known as Donnie's younger sister. She had become a star in her own right. Fans connected with her voice, her warmth, and the emotional sincerity she brought to country music. For the first time, she had carved out her own identity. Soon afterward, Marie teamed up professionally with her brother Donnie Osmond, and together they became one of television's most famous sibling duos. Their variety program, Donnie and Marie, became one of the biggest shows of the decade. The bright stage lights, elaborate dance numbers, celebrity guests, and cheerful humor made the show look glamorous. Millions tuned in every week. To audiences at home, Marie appeared energetic, funny, and completely in control. But behind the scenes, the pressure was becoming unbearable. At only 16 years old, Marie found herself surrounded by some of the most glamorous women in Hollywood. Week after week, she shared television screens with stars like Cher, Farrah Fawcett, and Raquel Welch. Instead of feeling successful, she often felt insecure and painfully self-conscious. Then came the criticism that would deeply damage her confidence. Despite weighing barely over 100 pounds, television executives reportedly told Marie she looked too heavy for television. Imagine hearing that as a teenage girl already struggling emotionally. The comments came from powerful adults running a major network production, and the humiliation stayed with her for years. The emotional damage was severe. Marie later admitted she developed dangerous eating habits while desperately trying to meet Hollywood's impossible standards. She survived on almost no food at times, pushing herself to unhealthy extremes because she feared criticism and rejection. Some days she became so weak she could barely perform under the hot studio lights. And yet the cameras never stopped rolling. How many child stars from that era were truly happy? And how many were simply trained to smile no matter how badly they were suffering inside? The workload itself was exhausting. Long filming days blended into rehearsals, interviews, choreography practice, recordings, and constant public appearances. In the entertainment industry of the 1970s, protections for young performers were nowhere near as strict as they are today. Teenagers were often expected to work with the stamina and discipline of adults. There was little room for emotional recovery. During this difficult period, Marie found unexpected comfort through a friendship with Lucille Ball. The legendary television icon reportedly became a mentor figure for her, offering guidance and emotional support during some of the most stressful years of her career. For Marie, having someone older in Hollywood who understood the pressure of fame made an enormous difference. Still, even as her career continued rising, major opportunities came and went. Marie was once offered the lead role of Sandy in Grease, the same role that later transformed Olivia Newton-John into an international superstar. But Marie turned the role down because she disliked the storyline of a woman changing herself for a man's approval. It was a decision that surprised many people in Hollywood. Even today, fans still ask the question, what would Marie Osmond's career have looked like if she had accepted the role? Would she have become an even bigger movie star? Or would the pressure have become even more overwhelming? Around the same period, Marie and Donnie also faced increasing public criticism during a tense interview with Barbara Walters. Questions surrounding their Mormon faith and conservative values created controversy at a time when American culture was rapidly changing during the late 1970s. For years, the Osmonds had been marketed as America's perfect family. But suddenly, audiences and critics began viewing them differently. Some people considered them outdated. Others questioned whether their wholesome image was genuine or carefully manufactured for television. The interview exposed cracks in the family's polished public image. Meanwhile, Marie's private life was becoming increasingly complicated. Fame made relationships difficult, and emotional wounds from childhood still affected her deeply. Behind the success, she often struggled with loneliness and self-worth. As adulthood arrived, the pressures only intensified. Marie eventually married young, hoping to build the stable family life she had always wanted. But balancing marriage, motherhood, and non-stop fame proved incredibly difficult. Public attention followed every relationship, every breakup, and every personal challenge. And throughout it all, people still expected her to smile. Over the years, Marie endured divorces, financial struggles, depression, and heartbreaking family tragedies that pushed her emotionally to the edge. Yet she continued performing, hosting shows, recording music, and appearing in public almost constantly. Why do audiences often expect celebrities to remain endlessly cheerful, even when their private lives are falling apart? Perhaps because fame creates an illusion. Fans see polished interviews, glamorous outfits, and stage performances, but they rarely see the emotional cost required to maintain that image year after year. For Marie, the emotional burden eventually became too heavy to hide forever. For years, she had mastered the art of smiling through pain. Audiences saw the polished performer, the cheerful television personality, and the woman who always appeared composed under pressure. But behind closed doors, the reality was very different. The emotional wounds she carried from childhood, combined with the crushing expectations of fame, had slowly built into something impossible to ignore. As time passed, Marie began speaking more openly about the trauma, fear, and emotional struggles that had shaped her life. For many fans, the revelations were shocking. The Osmond family had long represented an image of perfection in American entertainment. They seemed wholesome, disciplined, and untouchable. But suddenly, that carefully protected image began to crack. And perhaps that was exactly why so many people connected with her story. Because beneath the television lights and glamorous performances was a woman trying to survive experiences that would have emotionally destroyed many others. Her honesty transformed the way audiences viewed her. She was no longer simply a celebrity from a famous family. She became someone painfully human. How many people had spent years pretending everything was fine while silently falling apart inside? Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Marie's public image became both a blessing and a prison. She was expected to remain cheerful, graceful, and respectable at all times. America saw her as the perfect girl next door. But maintaining that image came with enormous pressure. Every relationship, every mistake, and every emotional struggle became something she felt forced to hide. Her romantic life became especially difficult under the spotlight. Failed relationships and public scrutiny only added to the emotional confusion she already carried from her past trauma. Trust did not come easily to her, and the constant attention from the media often made private pain feel even more overwhelming. In 1982, she married Stephen Craig, hoping marriage would finally bring stability into her life. For a while, it seemed like she had found peace. Fans saw photographs of a happy young couple beginning a future together. But behind the scenes, the pressures of celebrity life continued to grow stronger. By the mid-1980s, cracks had begun appearing in both her career and her marriage. At the same time, Marie faced another devastating challenge that few people openly discussed during that era: postpartum depression. After the birth of one of her children, Marie began experiencing severe emotional and physical symptoms that frightened her deeply. She later described feeling overwhelmed by sadness, exhaustion, panic, and emotional numbness. Some days, she barely recognized herself. The joy she expected to feel after becoming a mother was replaced by confusion and despair. And perhaps the hardest part was that almost nobody around her truly understood what she was experiencing. Back then, many women suffering from postpartum depression were simply told to be grateful or stay positive. Mental health discussions were far less common, especially for public figures expected to appear flawless. Women were often expected to continue smiling no matter how much pain they carried internally. How many mothers suffered silently because they feared being judged? Marie later revealed that at one point, she got into her car and drove aimlessly for hours, emotionally collapsing under the pressure of motherhood, fame, and years of unresolved trauma. The moment became symbolic of how isolated she truly felt. Despite being surrounded by fans, cameras, and constant attention, she was emotionally alone. In her memoir Behind the Smile, Marie shared deeply personal details about this painful chapter of her life. She described moments of crying alone on her kitchen floor while trying to maintain the image of a happy television star. The contrast between her public appearance and private suffering was heartbreaking. Readers connected with those confessions because they felt real. They were not carefully scripted Hollywood stories. They were raw admissions from someone who had spent years trying to hold herself together. Professionally, Marie also faced difficult changes during the 1990s. The entertainment industry was evolving rapidly. Country music had shifted toward a newer and edgier style, and her wholesome image no longer fit as naturally into the changing landscape. Younger artists were dominating the charts, and the industry that once embraced her began moving in a different direction. Although she continued performing and appearing on television, the era of Marie Osmond as a chart-topping music star was slowly fading. For many celebrities, that kind of career decline can become emotionally devastating. Fame often becomes tied to identity. When applause fades, some performers begin questioning their worth altogether. Was Marie now struggling not only with personal pain, but also with the fear of becoming forgotten? She later reunited with her brother Donny Osmond for another television project, bringing back memories of the duo that once captivated millions of viewers. Audiences loved seeing them together again. Their chemistry still felt natural, and nostalgia drew enormous attention to the show. But behind the scenes, tensions reportedly grew between the siblings. Years of pressure, control issues, exhaustion, and unresolved frustrations had quietly built over decades. Fame had shaped nearly every aspect of their lives since childhood, and emotional scars do not simply disappear with time. Even so, Marie refused to disappear from public life. In 2007, she joined the hit competition series Dancing with the Stars and quickly became one of the season's most talked-about contestants. Viewers admired her determination and resilience. She pushed herself physically and emotionally, determined to prove that she still belonged in the spotlight. Then came a shocking moment audiences would never forget. During a live broadcast, Marie suddenly collapsed after a performance. The incident stunned viewers watching at home. For a brief moment, fans feared something far more serious had happened. Thankfully, she recovered quickly afterward, but the moment reminded the public how physically demanding fame and performance can become, especially after decades in entertainment. Many people began seeing her differently after that incident. She was no longer simply the endlessly smiling performer from television. She was someone clearly pushing herself beyond exhaustion. Then came the darkest chapter of all. In 2010, Marie's son, Michael Blosel, tragically died by suicide at the age of 18. The loss shattered her emotionally. Few tragedies compare to the pain of losing a child, and the grief that followed became one of the most heartbreaking periods of her life. The public watched as Marie attempted to continue functioning through unimaginable sorrow. Yet what many people respected most was the way she chose honesty instead of silence. Rather than hiding from grief, she spoke openly about mental health, depression, and the devastating reality of losing a loved one to suicide. That honesty resonated deeply with countless families facing similar pain. How many parents quietly carried that same heartbreak while feeling completely alone? Marie's willingness to discuss grief publicly helped remove some of the stigma surrounding mental health conversations. In a world where celebrities often carefully manage their public image, her vulnerability felt unusually genuine. Over time, Marie also surprised many critics by publicly supporting her daughter Jessica after she came out as lesbian. Considering Marie's conservative religious upbringing, many people expected a very different reaction. Some even assumed she would distance herself publicly to protect her image. Instead, she chose love and acceptance over public expectations. That decision changed how many viewers saw her. Beneath the polished Hollywood image was a woman who had spent much of her life learning painful lessons about fear, judgment, and emotional isolation. Perhaps because she understood suffering so personally, she refused to let her daughter feel abandoned. For many fans, that moment revealed a completely different side of Marie Osmond. Then came one of the most emotional turning points of her later years. While appearing on The Talk and during interviews promoting her memoirs, Marie finally addressed the deepest wound she had hidden for decades, her childhood abuse. For years, fear had kept her silent. Fear of hurting her family. Fear of not being believed. Fear of destroying everything around her. Like many survivors from her generation, she had learned early that silence often felt safer than speaking the truth. And sadly, millions of people understood exactly why she stayed quiet for so long. Marie explained that the abuse affected nearly every aspect of her emotional life. It shaped how she viewed relationships, trust, and even her own identity. For years, she associated men with fear and danger. Emotional closeness became difficult because deep inside, part of her still felt unsafe. Trauma rarely disappears simply because time passes. Instead, it often hides beneath the surface, quietly influencing decisions, relationships, and emotions for decades. Marie's story revealed how childhood pain can continue affecting someone long after the world assumes they have moved on. Yet despite everything she endured, she slowly began rebuilding trust through relationships with people who genuinely cared about her. Healing did not happen quickly. It took years of emotional work, painful reflection, and difficult conversations. In later interviews, including emotional conversations with Mehmet Oz, Marie spoke with a sense of peace and closure that audiences had rarely seen before. She revealed that the people connected to her abuse were no longer alive, and for the first time, she no longer seemed interested in protecting old secrets. Instead, she focused on healing, honesty, and finally freeing herself from decades of silence. And maybe that is the most surprising part of Marie Osmond's story. Not the fame. Not the music career. Not the television success, scandals, or headlines. But the fact that after decades of pressure, heartbreak, criticism, trauma, and emotional exhaustion, she finally chose truth over image. Because behind one of television's brightest smiles was someone fighting battles the public never saw. And perhaps that leaves one final question worth thinking about. How many famous people spent their entire lives performing happiness while privately struggling with pain no one around them ever truly noticed?